Good afternoon. It's been a long week, but a good week. I have a confession to make to you, and you may be able to tell this about me already, but I'm a lawyer by day, but I'm secretly a private investigator in my heart because I love reports and details and things like that, and that's really what this case is about. First of all, for months, and really since the minute we started working on Quentin's case, we've been thinking about what in the world happened on that evening to Miss Jessica. And the problem is that there was a non-focus on who really did this to her. And then thereafter, a failure to investigate the facts in this case fully. Now, I thought about this over and over, and actually, when we went out there on Thursday to look out at the scene where the car was, I noticed that several of you went across the street as well, and we did that. And we wanted to get a perspective of what happened exactly. Saw some of you look down the street because actually what happened is this. The firefighters indicated that she came from a different area. She came from a wooded area and walked towards them. And that's a detail that you've got to pay attention to. She wasn't just at the car, or we don't even know if she was at the car. But we do know that the first firefighter, at least two or three, said that she came from a different area. But that was not something that was focused on from the beginning. And what will happen is that Mr. Peterson is going to elaborate because we kind of had different witnesses that we had to deal with. But in the beginning, the point that I'm trying to make to you is that it's the details of things that you cannot ignore. And I believe what Mr. Champion would have you do is just to ignore details. Eric or Derek, oh, this person said that. They were in shock. But the point of this is that reports were given. And what we can do is go back and look at what they said, because that's the purpose of writing a report. Now here we are. Mr. Peterson and myself, we have to make sure that you stay on focus here in this case, because it's the state's job, not our job. It's the state's job to prove that Quentin Tellis committed this crime beyond what's called a reasonable doubt. And reasonable doubt is at every step of the way when you pay attention to it in this case. I think they talked about putting a puzzle together yesterday. Law enforcement was putting a puzzle together. Still broken up. There's no picture here. Puzzle, each piece is broken, started in the beginning not properly. So as a review through those witnesses, let's start off first with the fact that there was a call from Miss Jessica to her mother, or vice versa. And that call would have been about 6:48 that day. There's clearly communications between Quentin and Jessica throughout the day, that morning, and the phone records reveal that. But this last phone call, I believe there was some discussion about they thought someone was in the car, but you couldn't hear anyone in the car, and then there was no additional identifying information. So if we're trying to figure out when did things happen or when did a crime start, this 6:48 last phone call basically indicates from her discussions with her mother that she was going to be back home later. So a call, we're trying to get information from that, but there was an ignoring of the fact that she said she'd be home later to clean her room up. So at least at that point, we knew she was communicating fine, and she was well. Now we have Miss Myers, who was her best friend. We heard her talk about that Jessica knew Quentin as Quentin. That's clear. And she said she never heard Jessica call him Eric. His name is Quentin. Why call him something that's not his name? Keisha knew Quentin as Quentin. Jessica knew Quentin as Quentin. She knew him. I know him. His name is Quentin. And on that Saturday as well, there were no problems between Quentin and Jessica as the three of them rode throughout Cortland. I know there was a remark by John, by Mr. Champion, that he pointed that out. He just said that in describing where they rode. And as a matter of fact, they came back by that area because that's just an area that they ride around in. Heron Road and some other areas, coming back to being dropped off later that day. Now, Keisha also told us a little bit of something about the fact that Jessica had indeed sold drugs to her knowledge, and that she had done that at least every other day for the past 6 months. Now, here's where I focus. Two things already we've looked at, and now we want to look at these first responders. Now, it's ridiculous to try in any way diminish anything that these individuals said. Sure, later on, they were in shock. But these reports were written, if you pay attention to what are written, because there are reports in there, if you pay attention to the dates on there, it's clearly a day or so later where they've had a minute to collect themselves and write what they experienced that day. Now, a report yesterday, 12/6 of 2014, 12/8, 12/9, that report is still going to be the same report to us today, which here we are, October 15th, 2017, which is today. So that's why we do them, so that we'll know and we can compare as to what happened that day. Now, if you recall, none of them, I don't think law enforcement mentioned at all that they brought them in to say, hey, okay, let's go through, let's look at your report, let's see what happened. That just didn't happen. You had a couple of the firefighters, and I'll be more specific with you. I have these, they're in evidence. You take a minute to look at each one of them. And honestly, I hope you didn't get sick of me saying, may I approach? Is this your statement? You wrote this that day? Yes, I recognize this. I wrote it. Cortland Fire Department. We had Mr. Cole Haley, fire chief. He was hesitant for some point. I don't understand. I don't know why he just didn't want to say what he wrote in his report, which was, when you look at it, it was very thorough, quite frankly. I asked what happened, and she said somebody set her on fire. And when asked who set her on fire, she would say what sounded to be Eric. It's spelled Eric, E-R-I-C. Next one, Jody Morris. And that is when she told us that Eric set her on fire. Eric, in quotes. The report is in there. Brandy Davis. Baby girl, can you tell me your name? Jessica Chambers. Baby girl, who did this to you? She replied, Eric. Baby girl again, who did this to you? She replied, Eric. Another one of the firefighters, Sandra Haley from the Polk Fire Department, what she did was lean down to assist him and try to make out anything as far as Eric's last name. So it's ridiculous to think otherwise and to diminish that. I believe the state said that, well, it was a lot of noise out there. You got folks bending down. You got folks at stretchers. You got folks getting in ambulances saying, who did this? And then she gives a name entirely different from who's here today on trial. I can continue on. We have now Seth Cook, I think this Yombers. Guess what? No report. He didn't do one. You won't see one in. Well, Actually, he did do one, but what you'll see is, I believe that he assisted with extinguishing the fire. So he came later to say yombers, or this additional information that he's giving 3 years later. Miss Haley from the Pope Fire Department, from the Pope Fire Department, I bent down and said, "Honey, who did this to you?" All I could get or understand was Eric. David Gamble, Pope Firefighter. He witnessed another firefighter standing there, asked, "Who did this?" She said, "Eric." It's a report that's in there. Okay, we had another firefighter, Casey Austin. This is where we get a little difference again. He said, "Eric or Derek." Guess what? He didn't do a report. I said, normally, don't you do a report right after an event like this? He answered, yes, normally we do. He didn't, but then he came in and said something different from everybody else who gave a report. Daniel Cole, the head guy. Very thorough report. It's in there. Look at it when you get back there. I then asked what happened, and Jessica responded saying a complete sentence. "Eric set me on fire." She stated multiple times, "Eric set me on fire." Then he got in the ambulance with her. She said, in response to him asking again, he's close to her. Eric did. Again, Eric who? She said she did not know. Very thorough report. And then the last two who were first responders were law enforcement who were out there. We had both Darrell House and Chuck Tucker. I asked Ms. Chambers, "Who did this to you?" She stated a guy named Eric. I asked if this was her boyfriend. She said that it wasn't. Chuck Tucker, "I got in the ambulance with her." I asked Jessica if she knew who did this to her. Jessica responded, "Eric." I asked her, "Eric who?" So again, this contention that it was this or that. I'm not saying don't investigate anything else. What I'm saying, though, is investigate what's accurate and what you already have before you. So here we have, like I said, I think I said this on Tuesday, 8 people individually who had their experience with her where they heard this name. It will be elaborated on, okay, really as to what the investigation was about this name, because it's not as they reflect. I think it was maybe 6 people. There's a list, but I think the way they describe it is that you get a list of the names of Eric from the Fusion Center, of which Fusion Center wasn't even mentioned in anybody's report anywhere. You look at the list, but you don't check out the list until you get somebody who calls in and says, okay, this Eric probably did it. So you take it and you compare it against the list that you have. So you really didn't check it out. And then there were 2 names that were actually interphone, that the phone records, only one of them was checked out. So this idea that Eric was checked out is just not true. That's not accurate. And something that I was almost in shock when I heard this. And moving from the name Eric, there were 2 firefighters who were out there who, by the way, their report is in there as well. And it just seems to me that law enforcement completely ignored these 2. Brandy Davis, Will Turner from the Cortland Fire Department. I know you remember them. I asked, wasn't there a strange man on the scene? One said, yes. He gave me a look. I think he said something like that a chill went through his body or something like that. A person who's right there in the midst at the very beginning, not an onlooker, none of that. This is a person that they thought enough to put in their report that this guy is suspicious. They got him off the scene, but he's suspicious and we need to put this down. And as a matter of fact, we need to get his tag number. And that's what they did. Both of them indicated to you that, yes, this guy was there. Yes, we got a tag. Yes, we told Daniel Cole, the head guy. And what did Daniel Cole tell you? Okay, well, we gave it to law enforcement. His report is in there, Daniel Cole. Look in there, and it says, I gave it to, I believe, Dixon, the person who started out the very scene, setting things up, who didn't extend the crime scene beyond the car. Now, the tag information, I would venture to say that that's probably Eric, but we don't know. I would imagine the tag information is gone. We have no idea what that is, but that's who I would say Eric is. The person looked back in the woods, the very area that she walked from. But see, again, that's a detail that details weren't paid attention to in this case. Now, there was medical information provided for us as well, and it burdens my heart to know that something like this happened. So we know that, yes, indeed, she was injured and she died as a result of her burns. But when talking with, I believe it was the autopsy doctor, there was an indication that there was no blunt force trauma or anything like that, and that nothing that would say fractures or smothering of her, as there was an indication about that yesterday from the state that that's what they thought may have happened. And then we had Dr. Hickerson, whose carefully worded medical opinion that when I said, well, surely she could still speak. I know she had injuries, but she was speaking. You have so many people would know that was an instant injury. I thought, well, she got to the hospital 2 hours later. And you have so many people who said that they heard her speak. No, it was improbable. And so finally he just said, I wasn't there. I said, yeah, you weren't. But 8 others were who heard her say a different name than the person who's here today. Now, DNA evidence, when we talk about that, I know Ms. Rogers went on to just kind of describe 2 processes. One process eliminated Quentin from that. It's a little bit more specific. So he wasn't included in those 4 individuals who were found on the keys that were allegedly, there's some question about that too, in my opinion, as to the person who found the keys. But there were 4 different type DNA combination found on those, of which he was excluded. The second type, he could not be excluded. But then there were also, it was a total of 4 male DNA in that combination. Well, he couldn't be excluded, but remember, he had been to the liquor store at one point. He had taken her to the hospital pretty recently before that. And then we got 3 people left. Now, who would you say of the 3 would be on there? Eric, probably. I would venture to say yes. Now, finally, we have Mr. Rowlett, who I admire, quite frankly. However, he was very frank with you about the reliability of cell phone records. And the thing about these cell phone records, too, is that they say he was Quentin this, Quentin wanted sex, he wanted this and that. But guess what? Jessica knew Quentin. The person that did this, she did not know that person. So first of all, the cell phone records are revealing that yes, she knew him and she'd been talking to him a lot. We got a week's worth of records where she knows who she's talking to. Now, as far as the reliability of these cell phone records, don't forget this now, because what he said is that the Cortland is kind of special because, one, there's no tower in the middle, and then the data that you're going to get from cell phone records is not as reliable. Cortland, the scene of where everything happened, does not have a cell phone tower, and therefore obtaining data to determine a person's location is just not good. So we can't really tell, and especially if you're not using your phone. Obtaining data in Batesville is a little bit better because much better because they have more and stronger towers. But there's a point in time when if calls aren't made and texts aren't made, then you can't determine where a person's located. So we don't know at some point where Jessica was, and we don't know at some point where Quentin was. So if you can't determine the location, how is it that you can automatically place a person from wherever to being at the scene of a crime if you don't have location, no independent eyewitness, none of that? Remember how he talked to you about they have to corroborate it some degree. You have to try and use M&M still photos, other things. I said, is there independent witnesses who saw him there? Well, no, we don't have that. Can you say that you could see him or anybody else getting a gas can from a shed? No, you can't see that. Well, you can't really see anything. It's not supporting anything. And just kind of in closing here for me, for my portion, the clips from the video footage from the store at M&M's reveal nothing other than cars coming out of a driveway. I asked that kind of continuously. Can you tell what kind of car is it? Can you tell who's getting out of the car? These are assumptions. This is what's called reasonable doubt, circumstantial evidence. You'll see that in there. Circumstantial evidence, not guilty. The judge read that instruction. Read it yourself, and then you can determine, this is not going to work, and we need to find him not guilty. I said this before about no information on cars coming out that they have all this footage of, but guess what information they did have on the very day everything happened, that if you think about it, it never even came back up when the state put on its case. We were the only ones who inquired about it. Law enforcement didn't mention it in any reports. Just wasn't talked about at all. But again, the information they did have would have been a tag number from a person that they thought looked back in the very direction that she walked from. Eric is not on trial today, but ladies and gentlemen, he should be. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before I went to law school, I used to sell furniture for a living. I worked at this place called Unclaimed Freight. It says, wear your coat, there's no heat. Can you hear me now better, sir? Sorry. And, you know, my boss, he used to tell me something. And this was one of his favorite quotes. And he would always say, facts are stubborn things. What he meant by that was, you got facts, it's pretty hard to get around those. They're stubborn things. They're pretty much immovable. Now, before I kind of talk about what I believe the evidence have shown this week, I like to always say a couple of different things. What the lawyers say is not evidence. We've been here all week. All of the evidence that you consider, and the judge has already told you that, is been presented from that witness stand in the form of exhibits, in the form of videos on this board. That's the evidence. My effort here is only to just recount some of the things that I consider to be more critical while you're doing your deliberations back in that room. Now, one thing I always like to point out is that as jurors, it is your exclusive province to determine what the facts in this case are, okay? You determine what those facts are. You determine what those facts are based upon your assessment of the witnesses that have testified at this trial. I can't tell you what the facts were. The prosecution can't tell you what the facts were. Those facts were presented from that witness stand in the form of exhibits, in the form of videos that the judge allowed to come into this trial. And you make an assessment as to what you believe those facts are. That's your sole responsibility as jurors. And that's one of the portions of the oath that you took at the beginning of this trial. Now, Mr. Champion referred to it as well, your good common sense. We all have to make sure that we keep a good grasp of that, just our good common sense. I can't tell you what good common sense is, but I believe all of you know what that means. And finally, if my recollection is a little bit different from yours, please do not think that I'm trying to mislead you. I'm simply commenting on what I believe that the evidence has shown. We've been here since Tuesday, and we spent the bigger part of those days together, including yesterday. So, this is what I won't do. I'm going to try not to bore you. But let me start with this one premise. Jessica Chambers knew Quentin Tellis. Now, the prosecution would have you believe that Mr. Tellis constantly hounded this young lady for sex. That is simply not the case. When you go back to that jury room, look at the evidence yourself. Who was her first contact that morning? It was Quentin Tellis. And what did she do? She sent him a text that says, "You're up?" And he responded, "Yes." Now, what I want to do is kind of comment on some of the evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, this investigation was flawed from the very beginning. And let me kind of make a distinction. When I say flawed, I don't mean to suggest that anyone did anything intentionally. I don't want to convey that. I met some good law enforcement officers here. I met some good prosecution person here. I have a lot of respect for them. But I want to point out to you what I believe are some of the inadequacies in their investigation. Now, we ask these people and we place on them an enormous responsibility. The first responders, those guys have to come out and they have to look at all types of horror. Jessica Chambers died a horrific death. That young lady experienced a great deal of pain. And we ask these guys to come out, and ladies, to care for us and to comfort us and to protect us, as well as these law enforcement officers. They have a tremendous responsibility. So my comments are not intended, although some of them may sound like I'm trying to second guess, but they're not intended to second guess these folks. They're merely intended to point out what I believe are some important points that you should consider during your deliberations. Edward Dixon, you may remember the gentleman from the stand. Mr. Dixon was a gentleman, and he talked about who was with him. His responsibility was to basically go out and collect evidence at the crime scene. He did so. He taped it off. He put that, we've all seen this yellow tape that surrounds these crime scenes, police line, do not cross. He did that. But his opinion was that the crime scene was the car. Now, when you all went out there, you all remember we went out to the crime area where the little tree farm was across the road. Got a chance to walk around. Mr. Dixon kind of taped that little area off. And I talked to Mr. Dixon, and he, from that stand. This was a gentleman, if you don't remember, this is a guy who say lives in Sardis. He's been doing this for 22 years, but he couldn't recall how long it took him to drive to work. That gentleman. Now, he taped off the crime scene, and he collected evidence. But he collected evidence, and he provided an inventory of the evidence that was collected from this little area. In spite of repeated indications that when these first responders made it to the scene, I believe one first responder, he indicated that when he made it there, it was a dark area. There's no street lights or anything out there. When he made it there, they pulled up, they saw the fire, and then out of the corner of his eyes, he saw something, I believe he described it as a zombie, and that's no disrespect intended to Ms. Chambers. But he said he thought it was a zombie. What did he do? He backed the truck up because he needed to get a handle on what was happening. He needed to protect his co-workers. And once he did that, and once he can assess that situation, then they provided Ms. Chambers care. They took care of her. They tried to provide whatever comfort they could to her. Okay? But she was coming from a wooded area that was away from the car. Okay? And while we have heard about these search and rescue teams that went out and apparently scoured this area and tried to collect evidence, we have seen no evidence that was collected, other than the evidence that would have been collected that was presented from this jury, from this witness stand. And I think it was a lighter, some articles of clothing. And those items are in evidence. My memory is not as good, but you'll be able to look at those items. But what you won't see is items that were collected from elsewhere, from the area where she came. And I believe that that is critical, ladies and gentlemen, because just as you walked across the street to the area that indicated it was a tree farm looking, just trying to get a lay of the land, law enforcement probably should have done the same thing. Mr. Dixon was also given the tag number of a suspicious man who, and I can't recall the firefighters, but keep in mind these first responders, you will have their statements to take back into the witness room and review and read yourself and see exactly what they said in their own writing. But he indicated that there was a middle-aged black man. He described it with detail. Look at the statement for yourself. This black man had on glasses. He had on a Bluetooth in his ear. And he looked at him with a stare that made him very uncomfortable. And he said, "Look, buddy, you need to leave. I'm going to get somebody to escort you out of here." And the guy was still reluctant to leave the scene. And he had to admonish him again. And read that in the statement. Don't take my word for it. Look at the statement for yourself. And as he walked away, he was looking back into the woods over in the area where the car was. I believe that that was a stone left unturned. Now, I'm going to skip around a little bit. We got information yesterday from a gentleman by the name of Paul Rowlett. You're going to remember him because he's the gentleman that gave you a bunch of information on this big screen here. We had to dim the lights a couple of times and look at it, not the videos. But let me tell you what Mr. Rowlett said. He said the collection of data is not his role. He analyzes data. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I submit to you that you cannot analyze data that you never received. The role of collecting data, especially in a murder investigation, is the role of law enforcement. That data has to be presented to Mr. Rowlett so that he can perform analysis. He can probably put together a 100-piece puzzle on the floor. He can pull all of that together. But I tell you, I've never been able to put together any puzzle that I didn't have all of the pieces to. And I suggest to you that he did not have all of those pieces. Now, so we left the crime scene and we're on the next day. And Tyler Mills or someone at the sheriff's department gets a call from a gentleman by the name of Jerry Lee King. Do you recall him? Mr. King was a guy who was walking his baby girl, and he found these keys, or so he says, and he picks them up out of the ditch, and what does he do? He gives them to his one-year-old baby to play with. I don't mean that to be disrespectful. I'm just recounting the facts that he testified to from the witness stand. And he went back home, and Miss Mary Tyner, she calls her Tyler Mills. She calls him on his cell phone. You recall that? She had a cell phone because she was his confidential informant. I don't think that's significant. So, but my point is this. She calls him, we have Jessica Chambers' keys, and guess what? You heard the testimony, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. We knew that those were her keys because of that. That little green tag right there. I live in Jackson, okay? Unfortunately, I've had a couple of car accidents. I always get my car fixed at Capital Body Shop. Capital Body Shop has a little tag on this thing. It's red and white with their name on it. They give it to everybody who has work done at their place. If you found my keys, I doubt very seriously you would know that they're my keys simply because of that tag. Again, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that's not my testimony. That was what Tyler Mills testified to from the witness stand. We got Jessica Chambers' keys. Well, how'd they know they were Jessica Chambers? Because it had a little green tag on it that says Ben Auto and Diesel Repair. And then what happened with the keys at that point? They took those keys, and he didn't take a picture of them at the house where he found them or where Mr. King presented them to him. He took those keys and they went back down the road and put them in the grass and took pictures of them based upon what? Solely on the word of Jerry Lee King. Now, we know Quentin Tellis and Jessica Chambers were in close proximity to each other. But now, how those keys were connected to Mr. King finding them on the side of the road, I don't know. But I thought that was something that you should give consideration to. And you'll see the pictures. You won't see a picture of these, and those are the keys there, ladies and gentlemen. The little pink rope has them. The little pink rope is on them. And they're laying out in this little grassy knoll, and I believe you'll recall his testimony. I said, well, it was a gully. We call them ditches in Canton. But I said, how deep was it? And I said, like that. And he said, no, not that deep. It was more like this. Just recall his testimony. And then there's been talk about this green dot card with Quentin Tellis. It's never been disputed. As a matter of fact, Mr. Tellis told them that he went to buy this green dot at Fred's. And Agent Blunt, significantly in his testimony, and as it relates to Mr. Champion's closing argument, he indicated that everything has been verified by video or some other means. Well, Detective Blunt testified from the witness stand that he went up to Fred's and he took a picture of that video surveillance showing Quentin Tellis and Fred's. You recall that? And when I asked him, you know, there was one exhibit that didn't have a time on it, then we ended up doing a smaller exhibit. And this exhibit had times on it. You recall that? And I asked him, The judge allowed me to question him again on that very issue. And I asked him, I said, did you verify that the time on that picture was accurate? And he said no. It wasn't verified. There was a time on Fred's surveillance. We don't know when the time was, but we know he went up and took a picture. That is just another flaw, in my opinion, in this investigation. Now, I talked with Major Barry Thompson. Major Thompson indicated, I believe, for the first time, and when I say for the first time, I don't mean he tried to hide anything, but he was a witness who talked about how extensive this investigation was. You remember? He said there was MBI, there was FBI, there was ATF, there was U.S. Attorney, there were Panola County Sheriff's Department individuals. You recall that? And no Eric or Derek, other than Derek Holmes, and I don't want to mislead you, was viable. But he indicated very little about what investigation was done to eliminate these individuals. Now, you're going to have some DNA testing when you go in the back, and you'll see everyone who was tested, DNA tested. Ladies and gentlemen, those are very few. I don't know what process they used to eliminate these suspects. I don't know how many suspects they eliminated. We talked, or they testified to there being hundreds. I believe there was testimony about this fusion center that provided hundreds of names. In Panola County, Mr. Rowlett said, well, you know, I even took that and expanded it out 1 degree. But ladies and gentlemen, that goes back to my earlier statement. Mr. Rowlett, I do not care how thorough his investigation skills are. And I believe he's a great guy, and I've heard that he's an incredible analyst. But you cannot analyze data that you do not have. And law enforcement was in charge of collecting this data that was ultimately, as Mr. Rowlett said, processed by him, that he analyzed, I think, yeah, he said he processes it. He analyzes it, and he disseminates it. But the data has to kind of be dumped over into that process. And you can't analyze data that you do not have. And that data would have come from law enforcement. Again, you know, Mr. Thompson, Major Barry Thompson, he also indicated that Mr. Tellus indicated to him that at the time of the fire, he was somewhere else. Do you recall that testimony? And my question was this: what was the time of the fire? He couldn't tell me. So if that was the case, how could Quentin Tellus have represented to him where he was at the time of the fire, when just a few days ago, from the witness stand, he could not articulate what the time of the fire was? If that is not your recollection, ladies and gentlemen, then go with your own recollection. I am simply pointing out things that I think are critical and will be critical during your deliberations. And again, I believe Mr. Thompson was as thorough in responding to my questions as he could be. But I think the vagueness of some of his answers reflect directly on the vagueness and the insufficiency of this investigation from the very beginning. Now, I also talked to a gentleman by the name of Tim Douglas. I'm sure you remember him. Mr. Douglas, I think he's a great guy. And I'm sure that when I was standing here, you all saw us exchange a bunch of smiles as we interacted. Mr. Douglas, he's a witness that talked about this fusion center. okay? And he talked about how they didn't limit themselves, and he actually talked about several Erics or Derricks that he interviewed personally. But we talk about this process of eliminating them as suspects, and I think that's important, and I'll explain that a little bit as I get farther. But there, again, I thought there were some fairly vague references to how they went about eliminating these suspects. Let me give you an example. Mr. Rowlett, he didn't collect the data, okay? But he was extremely good, I believe, in eliminating some of the people. A couple of examples. He talked about how he called a deputy he saw the deputy's phone number and some records, and he wanted to call and say, well, why are you talking to this person? And he went through that process, okay? He made several references to individuals on this video screen when they kind of came in and left camera, and he said, yeah, we did A, B, and C with those people, and this is how we went about excluding them, okay? Ladies and gentlemen, that goes back to exactly what I'm saying. Mr. Rowlett, with the data, with the inputs, he may be able to go through the process. But what about the data that does not make it to his attention? How is that? How is he analyzing it? How is he processing it? How is he disseminating that? He's not. He can't. We're talking about an impossibility. We cannot escape the fact, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that Eric. Now, the prosecution has said Eric or Derrick. I believe when you review the statements, you're going to see mostly Eric. And it was asked several times on cross-examination by my law partner. She said, how was it spelled? E-R-I-C. That's how it was spelled. Eric. Eric. The judge talked to you all a lot this week. You know, he says you're going to hear a lot of repetition. And every time you came back up into this box where you're sitting now, he said, did you follow my instructions? Ladies and gentlemen, what you've also heard a lot of repetition on this week is Eric. E-R-I-C. Quentin Tellis was interviewed 5 times. 5. Almost held up both hands. But 5 times. Voluntarily. They never had to force him there. He never requested a lawyer, even though I thought he should have. He didn't. He tried as best he could to answer the questions of the persons who were interrogating him. And he did that over and over and over again. You know, my undergrad was in finance. And part of some readings I did when I was in undergrad at Jackson State was to read some of the writings of Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett he made this quote, and he says that if the police follow you for 100 miles, at some point they're going to have a reason to pull you over. I don't know what that means. I'm not sure if I've ever been followed for 100 miles by police, but I think it's fairly viable. Ladies and gentlemen. 5 minutes. Thank you. This is Erica Chambers. We have seen her. This is a young lady. I'm not sure when this picture was taken, but it accurately reflects what she looks like. This was her during happier times. Erica Chambers knew her killer. And on the night that she was burned, she repeatedly, first responder after first responder, after first responder, after law enforcement said to anyone who listened, Eric did this to me. Eric set me on fire. E-R-I-C. Eric. She didn't say Quentin. If Erica Chambers had told 10 people that Quentin did this to her, I wouldn't be standing here before you. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we believe that after you go back into that jury room and after you apply some simple common sense, and after you look at the evidence that's been presented to you over this long week of testimony, we believe that you will find that the killer's name was Eric, E-R-I-C. E-R-I-C. It ain't complicated. And based upon that, we would ask that you find Mr. Tellis not guilty of capital murder. Thank you for your time.